All right. Good morning, everybody. We've still got a few people to join us, but they'll come in along the way. And I'd just like to welcome you all as we join Professor Saeko Yoshikawa live from Japan, where the temperature is a balmy 22 degrees, I understand. I'm just a bit envious of that. This is our first ever international and live streamed lecture as part of an Edward Thomas Literary Festival. We had the foreign language section, translation section last year, but that was a recorded one. So this is another step forward for us. My name's Jeremy Mitchell. I'm current chair of the Edward Thomas Fellowship and a trustee of Petersfield Museums, feet in both camps, and as such, ideally placed to be a co-organiser and host of the festival with my colleagues Ryan Watts and Lauren Wayland from the museum. Lauren is my technical support today and will also be monitoring the chat box if there are any questions for Saeko as we go along, which will be answered at the end. At this point, I'd also like to say we're grateful to players of the National Lottery whose support has been instrumental in bringing this festival to you. Saeko's illustrated talk today is about the nature of Edward Thomas's language, how words relate to things, and to what extent poetry is a translation actually of the world. We'll also explore how Thomas's poems gain new life and rhythms when they're translated into Japanese. Saeko is professor at the Department of English Studies in Kobe City University of Foreign Studies in Japan, and a scholar of English Romantic writing, author of William Wordsworth and the Invention of Tourism, and of William Wordsworth and Modern Travel, Railways, Motorcars and the Lake District. Extremely qualified to talk to us today. We also have a volume of her translations of Edward Thomas's poems into Japanese in the Edward Thomas Study Centre here at the museum, where I'm joining you from today. The talk is being recorded and will be available in due course for a short period once the festival has finished. So thank you very much everyone for joining us, and thank you Saeko. Away to you.
Thank you, Jeremy, for your very generous introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this Edward Thomas Literary Festival. It is a shame that I cannot be there in Petersfield in person, but still I'm very pleased to be able to give a talk online from Kobe, Japan, in spite of huge distance and time difference, about the 8-hour distance, then 6,000 miles distance. Okay, and I will start my talk. I'll share my, oops, this one. Okay. Can you? Oops.
Yes, that's looking good,
Right.
Saeko.
Okay,
yes,
good.
thank you.
Okay. I will start. It is often said that the poems of Edward Thomas are deceptively
Except you're
simple.
freezing every now and again.
Oops. Am I okay?
Yes, you're okay now.
All right. I will try again. Okay. It is often said that the poems of Edward Thomas are deceptively simple. His subjects are taken from commonplace sights and sounds, such as wayside flowers, trees, bird songs, roads and paths, season and weather, or what he encountered while he walked. His words seem plain and uncomplicated, so we usually do not need a dictionary. But it is surprisingly difficult to translate his poems into Japanese, mainly because a dictionary is not very useful. First of all, many of the names of birds, plants, and places in Thomas's poetry are not familiar to Japanese readers. And in his poems, as in all poems, rhyming and rhythmical structures overlay grammatical syntax. Wordplay such as punning, double meaning, chiasmus, repetition, and sound effects are in Thomas's poems often as important as verbal meanings. Thomas's suggestive and reticent style with succinct expressions and compressed syntax also makes it difficult to translate his poems into a totally different language system. But he comments as follows. Words never consent to correspond exactly to any object unless, like scientific terms, they are first killed. Hence the curious life of words in the hands of those that love all life so well that they do not kill even the slender words, but let them play on. And such a poet, the magic of words is due to their living freely among things. And so it is that children often make phrases that are poetry, though they still more often produce it in their acts and half-suggested thought. And that grown men with dictionaries are as murderers of words as entomologists of butterflies. Unlike scientific language, words in poetry do not have an exact or fixed correspondence with things in reality. Liberated from referential or representative functions, words have their own life and presence, living freely among things, as Thomas said. We may be able to say similar things about the relationship between the translation and original text. In this talk, I would like to explore the nature of language in Thomas's poetry in terms of word relationship with things, and to what extent poetry is a translation of the world. I would also like to speculate about what Thomas would have thought of his poems being translated into Japanese, using as an example my own translation published in Japan in 2015. In the poem Words, Thomas asks English words to choose him sometimes as their instrument. For Thomas, words are not merely a means to make sense. They have their own purpose and intention, and when they find a poet as an intermediary, they will produce poetry. As the winds use a crack in the wall or the rain, their joy or their pain to whistle through. The romantic idea of Aeolian harp is here transformed into commonplace images. It is not the poet that is inspired to compose, but words themselves that make poetry through the poet. Thomas believed in the independent life of words as the agent of creativity. In this poem, the elusive nature of word is described through contrasting adjectives. English words are said to be light as dreams, tough as oak, strange and sweet, equally and familiar, and old and young. They are precious as an old cloak, but they are not worn out. They are worn new again and again. With this succinct oxymoron, worn new, Thomas captured the renewability of words like that of streams after rain. The river is as old as the earth, but every rainstorm will make it new. Similarly, words are worn and born anew by continual usage. Language is described also as strange as the races of dead and unborn. The dead and unborn suggests the present absence of somebody who did or will exist in the past or future. This striking concept seems to suggest the present absence of referent. That is, words may refer to something at one point of time, but not now. Without corresponding objects, words become like semi-autonomous beings. Toward the end of the poem, the poet wishes that he could be content with some sweetness from Wales, Wiltshire, Kent, and Herefordshire, then as from the name and things, no less. Here, he treats names and things separately and on an equal footing. In this poem, words are independent, freed from things, and these thingless words are familiar and yet as strange as the dead and unborn. The thinglessness of words is also explored in another poem titled The World. There are so many things I have forgot that once were much to me, or that were not, all lost, as is a childless woman's child and its child's children, in the undefined abyss of what can never be again. The poet has lost all kinds of things, even something that cannot be lost, as is suggested by the oxymonic trope, a childless woman's child and its child's children. Forgetting assumes something that once existed but is now lost, while here it is imagined as an impossible future existence for something that does not exist now. The charming repetition of the word child echoes hollow in a cancelled posterity. In this poem, however, the poet says that he remembers some lesser things and even thingless, unsubstantial words. But lesser things there are, remembered yet, than all the others. One name that I have not, though it is an empty thingless name, forgot, never can die. This thingless name, that is, the name without a corresponding object, is delivered to the poet as a pure thrush word. Despite its emptiness, this word or name touches the poet, but because it is uttered through wordless bird song, readers cannot understand what the poet has heard or understood. Why does he not articulate what he thought or felt? Or can't he? Thomas was fascinated by this kind of pure language that has no clear reference and accordingly cannot be rendered in human language. Although without reference, this pure name is vaguely related to remembered scenes of wild roses or elder flowers. The strange relationship between smell, memory, and oblivion, and between names and things are also explored in The Old Man. This poem inquires into the nature of language that has hidden meanings that are never to be revealed. Thomas's wordplay starts from the title, Old Man, which has more than one meaning, and continues in the opening two lines. Old man, or lad's love, in the name there is nothing, to one that knows not lad's love, or old man. This chiasmic statement is almost tautological and certainly perplexing. As the third line reveals, these two names refer to feather-leaf herb, usually called southernwood. But the lines does not explain why this plant has these two names, old man and lad's love. The word do not represent or translate exactly what the plant is. Like the thingless name in the word, there is no thing or nothing in these names. Even to one that knows the plant well, he says, the name half decorate, half perplex the thing it is. Neither name quite fits the herb. There is a slight gap between the signifier and the signified. And Thomas particularly liked these elusive names, as he says. At least what that is clings not to the names in spite of time, and yet I like the name. Like these names, the narrator's attitude to the plant is complex and contradictory. The herb itself I like not, but for certain I love it, he says. He can't like its peculiar smell, but he would rather give up others more sweet with no meaning than this bitter one. The focus of the poem is seamlessly sliding from thingless names to smells that are with or without significance. While there is nothing in the herb's names, its bitter smell stirs memory, though it will never retrieve any image of the past. He is left fretful, waiting for what he should, yet never can remember. Hence, there is a parallel between the names and the smell. They are faintly linked with reality, the herb, the past experience, yet always somewhat removed. There is a parallel also between smelling the herb and our reading of Thomas's poems. Like the tantalizing yet elusive smell, the meanings of many of Thomas's lyrics continually escapes us. This kind of tantalizing language is celebrated in many of Thomas's poems, and in I Never Saw That Land Before it is famously described as a language not to be betrayed. This is never an empty, meaningless string of sounds. Its meaning is hidden and not easily revealed, even to the poet who utters it. Exemplars are to be found in the breeze that hinted all and nothing spoke, or in the language of birds and trees, and Thomas tries to emulate such a language in his poetry. In the world, what is most memorable is added through a pure thrush song. By bringing in the bird's song, he avoids limiting the meaning of the poem merely to the verbal. In digging, he closes the poem with the robin's sad songs of autumn mirth, without exploring what the paradoxical song means. Unlike the language of science that tries to uncover all mysteries, poetic language hints or suggests and does not explain. It is important that what was hid should still be hid. Other sounds also tell something valuable beyond the realm of human words. The penny whistle is closed with an old nursery melody played by a whistle that says far more than the poet is saying. In the last stanza of Home, we are given through the silence the sound of sawing that rounded all, the silence said. What is it that the silence said? How can the sound of sawing round it? Why did Thomas capture in the sound of the What did Thomas capture in the sound of the whistle? Readers are left uncertain. Many of Thomas's poems end with these evocative, nonverbal sounds that hint all but speak nothing. He encourages us to hearken to the wordless sounds of trees, birds, wind, farm implements, and instruments without explaining or translating them into intelligible messages or meanings. Like the sound of birds, winds, and trees, place names are untranslatable and have great potential as poetic language for Thomas. Of his poems that are evoked by place names, the most popular is probably Adlerstrop, and it is Thomas's best-known poem in Japan. As Old Man and Last Love have no significance for those who do not know the plant, Adlerstrop is nothing to those who do not know the place. Unlike such well-known places as London and Oxford, Adlerstrop does not have any association for Japanese readers. To our ears, it is a mere string of sounds. If anything, as it rhymes with a lemon drop, the word may bring back some sweet memories of childhood. But through Thomas's poem, the name Adlerstrop has begun to assume new significance and affective value, although this has little to do with the place itself, which was little more than a railway platform in Gloucestershire countryside. Unlike the smell of the hard southernwood, the name Adlerstrop brings back a clear memory to the narrator, a platform he saw from the train window on a June sunny afternoon, with the hissing sound of the steam, a cough, and a bird song. The scene represented in the poem is, however, simply a pastoral landscape that can be found anywhere in English countryside. There is nothing that is peculiar to the place Adlerstrop except for its name. And what is important in the poem is the name itself, and not the place it refers to. The name is severed from what it means for those who live there, that is, its historical, geographical, or social meaning. And liberated thus from its referentiality, the word begins to gain its autonomy around the middle of the poem. What I saw was Adlerstrop, only the name, and willows, willow herb, and grass, and meadowsweet, and haycock dry. Here, the name Adlerstrop is treated as equal to things in the theme, such as trees, flowers, and sky. The name is one component of this pastoral landscape in which the song of one blackbird stimulates other birds evoking the other place names, Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire, encompassing a wider area. And the featureless rural landscape of Adderstrom becomes a type of English countryside. Thus, in exchange for losing its connection with a particular place, the name Adderstrom obtains a more universal value. For some, the name may symbolize Englishness. For others, it may evoke a blissful recollection. And for many Japanese readers, it seems to stir a longing for a railway journey through an unknown place in the countryside, which does not have to be Adderstrom. The name and the geographical place, the signifier and signified, have now separate lives and significance. By analogy, this suggests a relationship between original and translated texts. That is to say, much as Thomas viewed poetic words as not fully corresponding to things, so a translation will not correspond exactly to an original. The two have separate lives and values. In his essay on Lafcadio-Han, Thomas praises Han's translation of Japanese ghostly and supernatural tales as one of the greatest treasures ever found by a translator in an utterly foreign land. It is difficult to translate any text from Japanese to English, and perhaps Han's should be called retold stories rather than translations. But Thomas is impressed that most stories are told without any interruption from the translator and exist by themselves with just a slight something absent which suggests the translation from a remote language. A good translation, in his opinion, should have its own life, independent of its original, and the translator should not explain too much. What was hid in the original text should still be hid in the translation. Thomas also says that Han's translation, for the most part, leaves the reader free to listen to speeches and watch events. In translated poetry, it is almost impossible to transfer rhetorical devices in the original text. But as Thomas encourages us, it is more important that the reader should enjoy the rhythmical movement of words and syntax of the language into which it is translated. In the translated text, thus, words acquire a new life and movement, living freely among things. If Thomas liked words to move freely among things, I imagine he would have liked the Japanese language, for it has a thing-like materiality and playfulness. It has three systems of writing, hiragana, katakana, and kanji, with different feelings, flavors, or textures. Here are examples of my name written different ways. This is hiragana, katakana, and this is kanji. By different combination of these three writing systems, we can convey different visual and tonal effects and atmosphere. Hiragana and katakana, respectively consisting of 46 letters, are both phonetic and have no correspondence with the English alphabet. Hiragana has a simple and gentle soft texture, owing to its sinuous or roundish tones appealing to the eye, while katakana gives a cool, mechanical, and scientific impression, and appealing more to the ear, as it is often used to transcribe various sounds like phonetic signs. Often used for foreign names, katakana can also evoke exoticism, novelty, and familiarity. As for ideographic kanji, each character has its own meaning and connotation, and also pictorial effect. Together, they produce a serious, solid, and intellectual atmosphere, like Latinate English, while hiragana appeals more to emotion and sensitivity. As you see from this PowerPoint slide, in translating Thomas's poems narrated by a child, like the child in the orchard or the child on the cliff, I used more of hiragana, like this green characters. While for his more serious and solemn poems, such as the Coom, the Glory, and this is no petty case of right or wrong, I used more of kanji here. The example, this purple character, the kanjis. And in the case of those that include several place names, such as if I should ever by chance, love, or address drop, it necessarily follows that I used more of katakana. This is example. Place names, like personal names, can rarely be translated to another language. Such words are phonetically transcribed so that they sound as similar as possible to the original pronunciation. In katakana transcription, we usually respect the pronunciation locally adopted. So Waterloo and Agincourt, mentioned in love, sound similar to the French pronunciation, Waterloo and Azincourt in my translation. In other cases, I try to reproduce the original sound as faithfully as possible, although this does not always work, just as we cannot write down the notes of bird songs in the musical score in any satisfactory way. Waterloo and Azincourt can evoke some historical association to the Japanese mind, whereas little-known place names such as Codham, Cochrane, Kildare, Roses, Purbo, Lapwater are words with non-associative sounds, like bird songs. But while physical images or associative meanings cannot be conveyed in the Japanese translation, the rhythmical sound of place names that so interested Thomas may be reproduced in the katakana transcription. In additional place names, the names of plants and birds are often written in katakana. Accordingly, in the translated text of Alderstrop, along with the station name Alderstrop, such nouns as willow, willow herb, meadowsweet, and blackbird are also rendered in katakana. In my Japanese version, therefore, Alderstrop appears on the page on par with birds and flowers, as you see here. So this is Alderstrop, and these are plant names, willow, willow herb, and meadowsweet. And here is the bird name, blackbird. And here again, place names, Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. The thing-like status of the name Alderstrop is thus solidified by the katakana rendition. A similar effect is also produced in the translation of If I Should Ever by Chance. In this poem, the narrator asks his daughter to find flowers like violets, primrose, orchises, and furs as rental payment for these places, Codham, Cochrane, Chudalage, Roses, Purbo, and Lapwater. Flowers and places are regarded as convertible, and this convertibility is expressed visually in the Japanese text of the poem by katakana rendition. So here is place names, and here are flower names, and here again, place names. So the place names look as if they are also flower names, as if the name narrator offers a bouquet of locations. Birds and plants are central images in many of Thomas's poems, and as many of them are unfamiliar to Japanese readers, I needed some devices to deal with their names. Sometimes I used generic names, and sometimes I used the names of similar species or Japanese equivalent to give general feelings of the poem. In the case of translating tree names, I often used kanji rather than katakana because tree names in kanji usually include a hieroglyphic character for the tree and can express the materiality of trees, as can be seen from these examples: oak, elm, beech, but, you, juniper. All of these kanji characters have these three characters here. Tree, 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 tree. Even if a specific tree is not familiar to Japanese readers, they can at least understand it is a kind of tree. Sometimes I tried word-for-word translation, as in the case of Jack in the Hedge and Robin Run by the Wall in Lob. Here, instead of using the names of Japanese equivalents, I literally translated these folkloric descriptive names, Kakine no Jack and Ishigaki Robin, in order to keep the personal names Jack and Robin in these flower names to stay in step with such names as Love Lie by the Fire, Jack Cade, and Robin Hood. In the case of Blackbird and Nightingale, I opted for descriptive names for them, Kuroutadori and Sayonaki-dori, respectively. Dori in these words means bird in Japanese, and in word-for-word translation, Kuroutadori means black songbird, and Sayonaki-dori means small nocturnal singing bird. In translating Old Man, the contrary names Old Man and Lad's Love made me think for a while. I could not use the Japanese name for the plant, as Thomas's poem is about these unique names as well as the herb itself. Literal translation of these words make no sense in Japanese, since they would not sound like names at all. Nor does phonetic transcription make sense either, as it would not embrace the double meanings of these names. After all, I invented two Japanese names for this plant using kanji, Okinagusa and Hatsukoigusa. Gusa included in these names means grass, making it clear that these are plant names, while Okina and Hatsukoi carry more or less the original meanings, old man and first love, respectively. I hope Thomas would have liked these invented names, old man grass and first love grass. Japanese language also inventive in describing the nature and conditions of things. We have numerous onomatopoeic and mimetic words, usually adjectives and adverbs, and we can endlessly invent new words which imitate sounds and orally express texture, temperature, humidity, attitude, feeling, or emotion. These mimetic words are effective in rendering the usage unique atmosphere of each poem. For instance, in the translated text of Adlerstrup, the bareness of the platform and the still lonely beauty of the scene are expressed in my translation through the mimetic words garan and hisori. Both words sound empty and lonely to the Japanese ear. Hisori comes from an onomatopoeia, hiso hiso, which imitates a whispering voice. While interestingly, garan is originally a word mimicking the loud voice of a big bell or hollow metal object. The sound reminds us of emptiness, hence we use the word for describing empty or bare space. One more example. In my translation of haymaking, the sharp and narrow shape of the swift is described as kiriri, and the squat oak as zunguri. Kiriri is originally an onomatopoeia for the creaking sound of bow drawn to its full extent, while zunguri comes from an old word for wooden spinning top, and it also refers to the onomatopoeia zun, equivalent to the English word thud. The auditory quality of these adjectives clearly picture to the Japanese mind the contrary images of a tight and smart figure and a stocky, heavy body. These words have their own shape and sound and are almost tangible as things. And they actually orally express how things or situation feel, or in what condition something or someone is situated. Japanese mimetic words are usually rhythmical with repetitive alliterative sounds like goro goro, imitating a rumbling roaring sound, bura bura, dangling swinging motion, para para, meaning sprinkling or scattering, and kira kira, describing a glittering or sparkling manner. Sometimes they create staccato rhythm by double consonant, as in hisori, conveying a still quiet and an unobtrusive manner, hosori, describing a slim, slender, or delicate body, yukkuri, meaning slowly and leisurely, and bikkuri, explaining surprise or startle. Although the exact rhymes and meter of the original poem, English text, cannot be transferred to Japanese text, by these rhythmical words, we can create new sound effects. In Rose, the winding of the road looks une-une, and the walker's footsteps sound pata-pata. In the barn, the rain drips with the sound of pota-pota, and the starling's spiky beard feels chiku-chiku. In translating the other, I used 3 rhyming mimic adverbs, sokkuri, zakkuri, kossori, to describe respectively the likeness of the narrator with the other man, the texture of the rough plowland, and the fugitive manner of the narrator. In this way, mimetic words vividly convey how things move or behave, or how they feel, sound, or look. And these words themselves have their thing-like or creature-like quality, weight, temperature, humidity, music, and expression. Another characteristic of Japanese is that it can be written both horizontally and vertically. So literally, words can move on the page in all directions. For literary works, though, we usually write from top to bottom and advancing from the right of the page to the left. And this vertical writing seemed apt for Thomas's rain poems. For just one example, here is After Rain, as I translated the poem into Japanese. In this translation, I tried to reproduce the hesitant rhythm of the original poem, How the Rain Falls, intermittently, sometimes strong, sometimes light, as is conveyed by the alternating long and short lines in the original text. These different lengths of the lines are kept in the translation and look more effective, thus rendered in vertical lines than in the original horizontal lines. For these lines now visually represent how the rain falls. In addition to his numerous rain poems, vertical writing may be suitable for other Thomas's poems as that pay attention to spatial dimension, like the up and down movement of something, and duration of the ground, or the relation of the earth and sky. Thomas was interested in negotiation between earth and sky and things moving between these two spheres, as we can see in such poems as Two Pewits, The Hollow Wood, The Lofty Sky, and November. I imagine that Thomas would have enjoyed seeing his poems translated into Japanese, where words move vertically on the page. So the different typology deployed in English and Japanese books creates different effects. In Japanese books, words move from top to bottom, and the text advances from right to left across the page. One page usually contains only 40 to 16 lines, while in English, one page can include about 30 lines. In reading a poem in Japanese, tracing lines from right to left, we often have to turn more pages than when reading an English poem. This reading experience may be more suitable for those of Thomas's poem that describe a journey or a continuing road, such as Early in the Morning, The Lofty Sky, The Other, and Rose. As you can see here, to read these poems in Japanese translation, the reader has to go across 2 or 3 times as many pages as the original text. We need to traverse more space, which seems to help us to get a sense of a long distance and passage of time described in the poem. To conclude, with its 3 systems of writing, inventiveness, varieties of rhythmical and mimetic epithets, and typographical flexibility, the Japanese language has a thing-like playful quality, appealing to our 5 senses, as well as to our intellect. In translating Thomas's poems into Japanese, one has to abandon wordplay, sound effects, and syntactical devices available to the English language. But his poems gain new life and rhythm in their Japanese versions. Their words sound and behave differently. As Thomas believed in the creativity of words and their free, independent life, I hope you will agree that he would have smiled to see how his poems discover themselves anew when translated into Japanese. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saeko. That was wonderful, fascinating, and wow! I can't believe what you went through in matching those words. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask Saeko, if you put them in the chat box, we'll pass them over to Saeko. But perhaps, I've got a couple of questions, so maybe I'll start off while other people are thinking. I think you've translated 1 poems, haven't you? Or it's about to see. How did you decide which ones you were going to translate for that book?
Well, I chose almost half of this one, so 70 something included in my translation, and I thought that maybe 2 long poems. I have to omit the 2 long poems, yeah. And also some poems are a bit too how to say too abstract, so I omit those poems. And then after that, well, probably I just chose my favorite ones.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love some of the things you were saying in there as well, like the independent life of words as an agent of creativity. I'm going to carry that with me.
Well, probably it is my pretext that because I gave up translating all the compressed syntax into Japanese, so I try to believe that Thomas would have liked my translation, that his poems had gained a new life in my translation.
Yeah. We've been asked if you would read maybe Adelstrop or another. I mean, it sounds like Adelstrop is a great favourite in Japan. Would you read that for us in your translated version, please?
Translated version? Okay. So where is my translation? I have to find though. Okay. 覚えていると思う。アドルストロップ。あの名前、暑い昼下がりのこと。急行列車が思いがけなくそこに止まったのだった。6月下旬のことだ。蒸気がシューシュー音を立てていた。誰かが咳払いをした。ガランとしたプラットフォームでは乗り降りするものはなかった。僕が見たのはアドルストロップ。その駅名と柳蘭。 牧草地、下野草、乾いた干し草の山、ただそれだけ。そのひっそりとした美しさは、空高く浮かぶちぎれ雲にも劣らない。そのひとときのために、黒歌鳥が近くで鳴いた。するとその周りで、霞がかった空で、遠く、もっと遠くで、鳥たちが一斉に鳴き出した。オックスフォードシャー、そしてグラスターシャーで。
Thank you.
But this is quite popular, so this is included in many anthologies in Japanese.
Right.
Yeah. So there are many versions of translations too. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Another question from Mary Mark. There are particular challenges, or are there particular challenges in going from English as a source language to Japanese, as opposed to going into another target language? And what do you think they are?
Yes, it is really difficult, but I think it was doing. I mean, many Japanese people can read some of the English, but still they hesitate to try reading some literature in English. So they want translation. So yes, because of this total difference, I think I need translation. And I hope some of the Japanese literature should be translated into English so that British people, American people can appreciate some beautiful, yes.
Yeah, well, I think that's another project I can see happening.
What I wanted to, sorry, can I just continue?
Yeah, yes, please.
What I wanted to ask you specifically is the fact that by going from English into Japanese, you have these 3 systems of writing Japanese. And I wanted to know, which I didn't know, and I wanted to know whether this was a facilitator for you when translating poetry, as opposed to a hindrance. I mean, did it help you to have these 3 varieties because you could switch from one to the other appropriately, depending on what you're translating?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I think that these 3 systems of writing are very helpful. When I'm translating, I try to keep the length of the line, and then using these kanji and katakana, and I can make the line as long as I like to, and or try to short. Yes. Like so these 3 systems are very useful. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Saeko. I think we've probably got time for one more question, which I've got here from Sarah, who says, fascinating talk. Thank you. As a painter, Sarah, especially interested in what you said about translation and the visual appeal. Do you feel that Thomas's poems relate to the complex yet apparently simplicity of Japanese haikus? And I was thinking about haikus as well. So thank you, Sarah, for asking that one.
Yes, I think so. Yes, the suggestiveness and the reticent way of saying something, or maybe expressing something through the images in nature is it's shared by some Japanese haiku. And so I think that his poetry appeal to the Japanese sensibility who is familiar with haiku tradition.
Yeah. Excellent. That is, and thank you for answering those questions at the end. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. We've got a relatively short window to prepare the room for the next session. So I think I'm going to say thank you ever so much to Saeko, and if you can find your little reactions and perhaps say thank you to Saeko like that, or just it was brilliant, and